Imagine reading a book in the park when suddenly an officer demands your ID. Your hands shake as you reach for your wallet, knowing any wrong move could end badly. This was Marcus Davis's reality on that spring afternoon. The next few moments would expose everything wrong with police racial profiling, as Officer Harkins made the biggest mistake of his 20-year career. Their encounter would soon spark a chain of events that neither man anticipated. Marcus Davis sat on a park bench, absorbed in James Baldwin's The Fire next time as children's laughter floated across the playground. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows through the oak trees. To anyone passing by, he was simply another resident enjoying the peaceful atmosphere of Cedar Park. Officer Brian Harkins noticed Marcus from across the green space, his patrol routine suddenly forgotten. His eyes fixed on the well-dressed black man sitting alone, and his jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. 20 years on the force had taught him to trust his instincts, he told himself, though these instincts seemed to manifest most strongly around certain people. He began walking across the park, his hand brushing against his utility belt. The familiar thoughts surfaced quickly. This neighborhood was too upscale for someone who looked like that to be just reading. The book could be a cover, a way to blend in while observing potential targets. His pace quickened as these thoughts solidified into certainty. Marcus noticed the change in atmosphere before he saw the officer. The playful shrieks of children grew distant as parents quietly gathered their little ones, steering them toward the parking lot. He kept his eyes on his book but remained acutely aware of his surroundings, drawing from his years of FBI training. The heavy footsteps approaching from his left told him everything he needed to know. Through his peripheral vision, Marcus observed the officer's right hand hovering near his weapon, the slightly elevated chin, the exaggerated swagger meant to project dominance. Harkins positioned himself to cast his shadow over Marcus's book, a calculated gesture of power. Marcus took a slow breath, carefully doguring his page. The slight curl of the officer's lip, the narrowed eyes suggesting suspicion without evidence, the tensed shoulders ready for confrontation all revealed assumptions made long before their interaction began. The park had grown quieter now, the remaining onlookers maintaining a careful distance while pretending not to watch. Marcus placed his book beside him with deliberate slowness, his movements carefully measured. He knew the next few moments would follow a script he'd seen hundreds of times before, only now he was living it firsthand. Harkins stopped directly in front of Marcus, his shadow stretching across the bench. The tension in the air crystallized as he opened his mouth to speak, and Marcus braced himself for what was coming. Words can be weapons or shields, and in the next few moments, both men would demonstrate exactly how language shapes the balance of power. As Harkins prepared to assert his authority, they stood locked in an unspoken confrontation, each word carrying weight. "Let me see some ID," Harkins barked, his tone carrying an accusation rather than a request. Marcus remained still, his hands visible on his lap as he looked up at the officer with practiced calm. "May I ask why you need to see my identification, officer?" His voice was steady, professional. The question seemed to catch Harkins off guard. He shifted his weight, his hand hovering near his belt. "Because I said so. This is a nice neighborhood, just making sure everything's in order." Marcus maintained eye contact, his breathing deliberately slow. "Officer, I understand you're doing your job, but I'm simply reading in a public park. I need a specific reason for this interaction." His words demonstrated knowledge while avoiding any hint of challenge. Harkins' face flushed red. The calm, articulate responses from Marcus fueled his frustration more than defiance would have. "Listen here," he growled, stepping closer. "You can either show me some ID right now, or we can discuss this down at the station." His fingers flexed near his handcuffs. Marcus recognized the signs of an officer feeling threatened by his inability to provoke a reaction. "Officer, I want to cooperate," Marcus said softly, "but I also need to understand." "That's it," Harkins snapped, reaching for his handcuffs. "Stand up and put your hands behind your back." "You're under arrest for interfering with a police officer." Marcus could have revealed his identity then, could have ended the situation with a few simple words. Instead, he slowly stood, maintaining his composure as the cold metal closed around his wrists. As Harkins guided him toward the patrol car, Marcus continued his mental documentation of every procedural violation, every sign of bias, every moment that would soon become evidence. The park had fallen completely silent now, witnesses filming with their phones, capturing what they thought was just another example of racial profiling. None of them realized they were watching the beginning of something much bigger. In a police precinct, whispers travel faster than radio calls. As Harkins marched his arrestee through the station doors, activity slowed first at the booking desk, then spreading outward until only Harkins remained unaware of his mistake. Officer Jenkins looked up as they approached, his fingers hovering over the keyboard. He paused mid-keystroke, eyes darting between Marcus and his computer screen. Recognition dawned slowly as the color drained from his face. The standard booking questions died in his throat. Harkins, confident in his authority, began reciting the details. Got this one for interference, possible suspicious activity. Refused to show ID when he faltered, catching Jenkins' expression. The precinct's usual noise had diminished to whispers. A young officer with a stack of paperwork stood frozen, staring at Marcus. Two detectives by the water cooler fell silent, coffee cups suspended. The atmosphere grew heavy, yet Harkins remained blind to the signals around him. Marcus stood quietly, hands cuffed behind him, as recognition rippled through the room. His presence commanded attention despite his restraints. Officers who would normally ignore another booking now straightened unconsciously, their faces showing a mix of shock and unease. Captain Bennett emerged from her office, drawn by the strange quiet. She took in the scene: the handcuffs, Harkins' stance, Marcus's composure. Her coffee cup clattered against her desk, and her voice cut through the silence. Officer Harkins, her tone made everyone stand straighter. Step away from Mr. Davis immediately. The command left no room for argument, though confusion crossed Harkins' face. He stood frozen, hands still gripping Marcus's arm, caught between authority and uncertainty. Officers exchanged knowing glances, some reaching for their phones. Captain Bennett's heels clicked against the floor as she approached, each step marking time until revelation. In my office, she ordered, her voice carrying absolute finality. Now. What happens when a police officer's deepest biases collide with the harsh light of accountability? As Captain Bennett's office door clicked shut, the answer to that question was about to unfold in ways that would echo through the entire department. Harkins stood at attention, his confidence eroding under Captain Bennett's steady gaze. He launched into his explanation, describing the suspicious behavior he'd observed in the park. Each word seemed to dig his hole deeper as Bennett's expression hardened. She let him talk, allowing his justifications to hang in the air. Officer Harkins Bennett interrupted, her voice carrying the weight of 2 decades of service. The man you arrested today is FBI Special Agent Marcus Davis. He was conducting an assessment of community policing practices in our district. The words landed like physical blows. Harkins' face drained of color as she laid out the witness statements on her desk, each one describing his aggressive approach from the start. The revelation collapsed something inside Harkins. 20 years of certainty about his instincts, his judgment, his authority crumbled under the weight of this single, devastating mistake. The badge that had always felt like a shield now seemed to burn against his chest. Marcus entered the office with quiet dignity. His composure made Harkins' discomfort more apparent. Your actions reflect deeper patterns that affect real people in real situations, Marcus stated, his voice steady and professional. The words cut through Harkins' remaining defenses. Captain Bennett leaned forward, her expression grave. This incident has brought to light the need for systemic change, she declared. And I'm committed to making that happen. She informed Harkins he would be placed on temporary leave while the investigation continued. His usual confident stance transformed into something smaller, more uncertain. The investigation would involve multiple officers and internal affairs representatives, Bennett explained. But the real consequence was already evident in Harkins' eyes, the crushing realization that his actions hadn't protected anyone. As Harkins left the office, his movements mechanical, the impact of the day's events radiated through the precinct. The incident had become a moment of reckoning, forcing every person wearing a badge to question their assumptions, their biases, their definition of protecting and serving. The real work was beginning. Behind every badge lies a choice to protect or to profile, to serve or to suppress. As Captain Bennett investigated the department's history, she discovered that Harkins represented a systemic failure that had taken root years ago. The internal investigation revealed a disturbing pattern in the park incident. Witness statements showed Harkins approaching Marcus with predetermined assumptions, echoing previous incidents that had been dismissed and forgotten within the bureaucracy. The precinct fractured along ideological lines. Veterans clung to traditional methods, defending instinct and experience as essential policing tools. Reform-minded officers saw an opportunity to rebuild community trust, recognizing that effective law enforcement required equal treatment for all citizens. Marcus Davis transformed from an arrested civilian into an agent of change, collaborating with Captain Bennett to address the department's deep-seated issues. In their discussions, he emphasized the need for comprehensive reform that would alter the fundamental culture of policing. Bennett responded by implementing substantive changes throughout the department. New training programs confronted racial bias head-on, while enhanced oversight mechanisms ensured accountability. She established clear standards for community interaction, knowing that meaningful change required more than surface-level adjustments. Some officers bristled at these changes, viewing them as an indictment of their experience and judgment. Bennett maintained her resolve, recognizing that temporary discord often preceded lasting progress. She focused on rebuilding trust both internally and with the community they served. Together, Bennett and Marcus developed strategies that balanced immediate reforms with sustained cultural evolution. Their approach centered on helping officers understand their impact on the communities they protected, fostering awareness without resorting to blame or punishment. The precinct's atmosphere gradually shifted as the new policies took hold. Even initial skeptics began to appreciate the improvements in community relations. The transformation that started with one incident had grown into a model for institutional change within law enforcement. Standing in her office, reviewing the implementation plans, Bennett understood that wearing the badge meant making choices that would shape the department's future, one decision at a time. The manila folder sat unopened on Bennett's desk, containing data that would either validate or shatter all their efforts at reform. Inside lay the results of 3 years of intensive change. The real measure of success would be found in the faces Marcus encountered as he walked through those precinct doors one last time. The transformation was immediately apparent. Where tension once filled the air, there was now a sense of purposeful calm. Officers greeted citizens in the lobby with genuine attention, their body language open and respectful. The defensive posture that had once been standard had given way to something more authentic. The data painted a clear picture of progress. Complaints related to racial profiling had decreased by 30% since implementing comprehensive bias training. Use of force incidents showed a 20% reduction, while public trust increased by 25%, according to community surveys and cooperation rates. These numbers reflected a fundamental shift in department culture. A small group of veteran officers maintained their resistance, viewing the reforms as criticism of their service. Their subtle protests emerged in rolled eyes during training sessions and whispered complaints in break rooms. Yet the success of officers embracing the new approach spoke louder than any objections. The impact reached beyond Cedar Park's walls. Other departments studied their methods, while community oversight committees evolved from adversaries to essential partners. Officers developed a culture of accountability, addressing concerning behavior among peers with newfound confidence. Marcus watched as a young officer diffused a tense situation in the lobby, using techniques that would have been unthinkable 3 years ago. The officer's calm demeanor and respectful dialogue achieved willing cooperation from a frustrated citizen, a small moment that embodied their larger mission. As he prepared to leave, Marcus reflected on how one incident of prejudice had led to meaningful institutional change. The department's transformation offered a blueprint for others, showing what was possible when accountability aligned with commitment. The path remained challenging, but the foundation stood firm. Standing near the exit, Marcus caught sight of a newly installed plaque. It didn't mention his name or the incident that sparked these changes. Instead, it simply read, "To protect and serve all citizens, every time." The words carried the weight of hard-won progress and promised even more to come. Change begins when we're forced to confront difficult truths. Marcus Davis's encounter in Cedar Park revealed how one incident could transform an entire institution through proper accountability. His experience demonstrated that meaningful reform requires both institutional changes and personal growth. Officers must recognize and address their biases, while communities maintain vigilant oversight of law enforcement practices. The badge symbolizes equal protection for all. By speaking up against injustice and examining our own assumptions, we strengthen this promise. A better system emerges when we acknowledge our shortcomings and commit to improvement, not through punishment alone, but through sustained effort toward positive change.